Hey everybody, Elizabeth Nader back with you on the Nader Narrative and Jersey First TV. Today we are talking about the tax code and philanthropy. Sound boring? Not boring, not boring. It affects your life. So I really want you to start to understand how the giving nature of America affects everything. You know, we are known as the most giving country, generous country in the world. We really are. We give more money to philanthropy opportunities, to faith organizations, to organizations outside of our country. We are the generous nation, and that's great. But what's happening with that generous spirit, and how is it rooted in actually the laws that Congress pass? Have you ever thought about the connection? And what does that mean to you? How does it affect things like volunteering and people's desire to pass on wealth to their family, and how that impacts the different organizations? There's so much about this that's important to understand. And while our country is in a fight over so many things, one thing you may not realize is that with the new election in 24, there may be changes ahead, even more changes with the tax code, which will affect giving and estates and so many things that really have an effect across our entire culture and country. So we're going to bring in an expert in this area because it's far reaching. Sandra Swirski, welcome to Jersey First TV. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such an important topic.
It is an important topic, and you are coming to us from DC. I see that beautiful background there, and just so that our viewers understand, you've got a long resume. You have been on Capitol Hill a long time talking about this and other issues, well experienced in governmental relations. You have your own, of course, women-owned government relations firm, which I love, and so many things that you do. One of them, of course, the Philanthropy Editorial Board of Trust. You're serving as a member on that. Sandra, this topic is important to you. Why?
Yeah, this topic is important to me because both from a personal level, because our family has a deep-rooted faith in charity and philanthropy, but it's also important from a professional perspective. So many of our clients are business leaders and have been involved in very successful businesses. And as they've transitioned through those businesses and through the chapters in their lives, most of them end up thinking about philanthropy, thinking about their legacy as business owners, as leaders of their community. And so increasingly, we are spending a lot of time helping these folks figure out their legacy, and finding that Congress is sometimes generous and sometimes inadvertently stymieing some of these most generous people. And so that's why it's both personally and then professionally really important.
Really important. Now, I said in the beginning that the United States, our country, is well known to be generous, and we really do have that reputation as a people. That's been encouraged with our tax code in the past. Why should that matter to people that the United States is a generous nation, and why should people care that we be given the opportunity to continue to be that way?
Yeah, so our country is different than any other country on the face of this earth, and having philanthropy as one of our first principles as a country has really helped to shape why we are unique, why we are so different. Philanthropy and giving to charity and community efforts and helping your neighbors, part of how we were founded. Yeah. And it's what makes America unique and different.
Yeah, it really does. And it's interesting if you look at it from either a faith-based standpoint, because there certainly is the Christian Judeo values that founded our country, that you could look at those and say, there's generosity sort of built into that and an idea that you give back. But even if you go away from the faith-based view of it and you look at what our laws have been, it's encouraged people to give and to be generous. So we actually have tax write-offs to that end. And anybody can take advantage of that. So while we're going to talk a little bit about estates and philanthropy at the higher level, let's talk about just the everyday person in this country and how they can benefit not just from a, let's say, spiritual standpoint of being generous, right? But how they benefit from the tax code as it relates to giving.
Sure. So this is a really important conversation because when I talk to members on Capitol Hill, they talk about the charitable deduction as a tax benefit and as a write-off for the wealthy. And I like to remind them that there are hundreds of different deductions and credits that people avail of themselves in the tax code, right? There's the home mortgage interest deduction and other credits that are encouraging you to buy something bigger for yourself or buy something different, buy a fancy light bulb or a fancy solar panel. The charitable deduction is the only provision in the tax code that is encouraging you to give away something. It is not at all encouraging you to buy something bigger or better or shinier for yourself. It's encouraging you to give away your income. So it really is incredibly different. And that's why, for that reason and for so many others, it's critical that lawmakers make that distinction. It shouldn't be lumped in to all of the business tax credits and individual tax credits and deductions, because it really does stand alone.
I love the way you say that. It's about giving, not about buying or not about enriching yourself with something. It's about giving. And we know what that does when you have a generous spirit. We know that that's rooted in gratitude and how it can change your life. But the very tax code has encouraged it for everyone. Now, things are changing. And you have noticed, as have others, that perhaps the next generations aren't really understanding this. Let's talk about volunteering first, because I think when people volunteer and they have that kind of mindset, it's related then to giving, right? It's a form of giving. It's not tax deductible per se, but it's a form of giving. So volunteering in itself is on the decline. And I have to tell you, Sandra, I have noticed since, just watching my father in action in the Rotaries and the Elks and all these clubs, those clubs are declining. That's a form of volunteering and giving back. So first of all, what's happening? Why is volunteering not really as popular as it used to be?
Yeah, that's a really astute observation. Both volunteering and giving of resources are down. There's been about a 10-year steady decline every year over year in the decline of volunteering and in giving to charity. And folks way smarter than I am are trying to figure out why that's happening now.
Yeah.
I think that the data shows that there was a bump up post-COVID when neighbors were helping neighbors, and there was this mutual aid among communities. But that does not change the trend, which is downward. And Congress is starting to really take a look at this and try to address what's the root cause and how can we turn it around. But it is the fraying. Some have suggested it is the fraying of our neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Some have suggested that there's lots of books written. Bowling alone is one of them. The spirit of generosity is declining. We don't know our neighbors as well. We drive into our driveways, open our garages, drive in, close it, and that's the end of that. And so there are plenty of efforts within communities to try to roll that back, but it is having a knock-on effect to charitable giving, and which is very problematic because, as you know, charities are the experts in their communities' problems, solutions, needs. They're closest to the people. Our government tries to fix problems, but they're usual one-size-fits-all solutions, whereas the charities can really tailor the solutions and the aid and the need to what is happening in their community. And as we see not only generosity in decline, but giving to these important charities in decline, it really is a clarion call to this country to right that ship.
Well, you bring up so many points there. I mean, it is rooted in the fabric of society. So if we are declining in terms of our connection to people, if the family unit is declining, if Children aren't being raised with those values. And the problem is that the issues that charities address still exist. The needs are still there. So if they're unable to fill those needs, and we have to start relying on the government to do so, you and I both know what that leads to, right? Which is bloated government. They don't do it as well. That's been proven time and time again, that private individuals and private institutions and faith-based institutions, all of them just are more efficient. And for the most part, they're just better at addressing these issues. So now we start to see, well, somebody's got to fill the gap. And so then it's now bloated government. So this in itself needs to be addressed. So point one to the audience, I think, is to take a personal inventory of your family, your children, those in your sphere of influence. And, is this a priority for you when you do your budgets, when you look at your finances? I've raised my kids to say the first 10% you give away. It's an interesting shift. So that's kind of the, let's say, psychological factors, right, of what's happening in our society. Now let's go to the tax code. How has that changed or is changing to either help or hurt what's going on in the country?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that taxes do matter. And when taxes are high, people have less in their pocket and less to give. And when taxes are lowered, they feel like they have the ability, the wherewithal to give more. When taxes are lower, we see booming stock markets, right? And that also contributes to generosity. When we see markets in decline, we also see giving in decline. And so there are exact correlations. And over the past couple of years, when we've seen taxes low, we have seen particularly the upper income levels give very generously. And so while there has been a decline in the number of givers in the US, giving resources overall has gone up every year. And so what that means really is that you've got a smaller pool of people who are giving these outsized gifts. Right. And I think that to the extent that we look ahead and see maybe tax rates rising for everyone overall, that is going to be a further disincentive for everyday givers, right? I think we'll always have very wealthy people giving. But we are increasingly seeing people in the middle and lower pulling back. And so encouraging through the tax code or otherwise these everyday givers is really important, making sure that they understand that their gift, however small, is just as valued as those who are giving millions.
As you say that, I really tie this to the change in our economic structure. And it's frightening to me as we see the middle class being squeezed out. So this disparity of income getting deeper and deeper, wider and wider between, the very wealthy and their givers. And that's great, but we need the middle class and we need them to feel as though they can make a difference. I think one of the best things when you see charities who have raised a certain amount, but the donor numbers are higher, right? It's not just one giver. It's not just an estate, a foundation, that it's everyday people. But if we continue to squeeze the middle class and we continue to make life difficult for them, as you say, the burden is going to remain with, the top 1%. And yes, they give, but is that sustainable? Now, let's even talk about them for a minute. Let's talk about these estates that are passing down in families and these larger gifts. Trump put in some tax cuts, if you will, and some estate planning laws that affect these generational transfers of wealth. That is set to expire, a lot of that. What is the change? If nothing is done, how will this affect estates, philanthropy, and passing on of already tax dollars? Let's be honest, right?
Yeah, sure. So we have a big fiscal cliff coming at the end of 2025. As you noted, at the end of 2025, all of the Republican Trump tax relief ends and all those higher tax rates snap back, whether it's on the estate tax or the individual tax, it all snaps back. And charities are concerned because when that happens, people have less in their own pockets. right? And then therefore even less to give. Speaking specifically about the estate tax, now is a good time to die.
Yeah.
After 2025,
Yes, that's so
right?
true.
Now is a good time to go.
Yeah.
And after 2025, if nothing is done, the states are going to see a big tax increase for sure. And so that's going to have ramifications for their heirs, right, for next generations, and it's also going to have big ramifications for charity. So we need to be encouraging Congress to do whatever they can to make sure that taxes remain low heading into 2026. We have to force Congress to act.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're going to see this huge slew of taxes increase beginning in 2026.
So you're on the Hill a lot. You're well connected. You're talking about this issue. Give me some hope. I mean,
Yeah.
elections, of course, have consequences. Do you think, even no matter the outcome of the presidential election, or if there is a shift in Congress, in November, but do you think this will be addressed, or are we really heading for a cliff that potentially we can't pull back from?
Yeah, great question. So already, right? I mean, there are huge organizations and lots of grassroots operations that are beginning to gear up on their particular set of issues, whether it's the business community or the nonprofit community or individuals. They are beginning to see this fiscal cliff. And they are looking beyond the election and looking at this fiscal cliff, and they're starting to organize and collaborate and put into place a strategy to make sure members of Congress, Democrat or Republican, members of Congress understand that they're going to be held accountable in 2026 if nothing is done in 2025. And that often can move the needle. When members of Congress hear from their constituents and their constituents articulate, we've got a fiscal cliff coming. What are you going to do about it? I can't afford more taxes. I can't afford the amounts I'm paying right now. We need you to act and make sure that tax rates are kept low heading into 2026. When constituents can articulate to their members that they see what's coming and they will hold them accountable, that is very, very powerful. And unlike previous years where a lot of folks were late to the game, we're starting early this year and making sure that members understand that this election's important. Whoever wins, we're going to hold you accountable.
Yeah, that's so important. And when we end this here in a few minutes, I want to restate that so people have a call to action. I have a question for you that has always bothered me, Sandra, and you might be able to give some insight into this because you've done this for so long and you're so deeply connected. Why is this a partisan issue? I mean, when we look at members of Congress, even personally, they have their own wealth, they have their own estates, they have their own members in their family who may, in some cases, be wealthy, others middle class, whatever. How is this partisan? We're talking about money in your pocket. We're talking about things that shouldn't really have an R or a D on them, but they seem to be partisan issues. Illuminate that subject because that's always bothered me.
Yeah. So the way I look at it is there are two worldviews. There is one worldview that subscribes to an individual knows best how to make change and to address problems and solutions in their own community. And that worldview, therefore, looks for lower taxes because they trust the individual to make that change and to work within their own community. The other worldview is that government best takes care of those needs. And in order for government to take care of those needs, government needs money. And so that's why they subscribe to a much higher taxes to feed the government, to take care of our communities, and to address our problems. Now, government is not closest to the people, so you get a one-size-fits-all solution. On the other, the more Republican worldview is we can take care of our own. We want to take care of our own. Trust us to take care of our own.
Right.
So it is really two completely separate worldviews. And depending on where you fall, you're either going to be in favor of higher taxes or lower taxes.
Yeah, that is such a good point. And it reminds me of what Ronald Reagan used to say, right? The worst words you can hear is, "I'm the government, I'm here to help." Um, and so I love that. And you're right, it's worldviews. I think it always is strange though, because behind those worldviews are real people with wallets and their own needs. So the most
Yeah.
important thing, like you said, is that each of us with our own issues and our own concerns, and it doesn't matter what aspect of the scale you're on from a wealth standpoint, this will affect you. And
Mhm.
let's not forget that you may be in need of services someday, or your family from a charity, a faith-based organization. You want them to be around, so it should concern you all around. So tell people the best way for them to advocate with their members of Congress. What should they say? Are there websites they can go to for more information? Just sometimes people have a hard time articulating this, so help them a little.
Yeah, so I think it's a very simple message for people when they have an opportunity, either through social media or through meeting with their members where they live, is to let them know that um, our country's economy is dependent on what Congress does with the tax code in 2025. We are either going to rise or we are going to fall.
That's right.
And it is critical for them to take this very seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that there are plenty of news sources. I would really encourage folks to pay attention to the Wall Street Journal. They do an outstanding job explaining things very simply
Yeah.
about what's happening in Washington, particularly on taxes, which is so personal to everybody. So my sources are the Wall Street Journal, and then of course Jersey First. Keep close to those organizations that are closest to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean Jersey. No one does it better than Jersey First for people in New Jersey.
Well, let's remind everybody, Rosemary Becky is a tax attorney, and she is, of course, the founder of Jersey First, and
Mhm.
she has a lot of experience on the Hill as well, and
Absolutely.
helped bring us the 529 plans, which, as a mother of
Mhm.
4 teenagers, I'm always thanking her for. But yeah, she's well versed, and it's a passion of hers, and this is such an important issue. And I want to thank you, Sandra, because I know this is a big part of your life's work and focusing
Yeah.
on philanthropy. And you make such a good point. It is really the fabric of our society we have to take care of, because things are changing and not for the better in this regard. Let's all take a part. Let's call our Congress people. Let's and look internally. Let's look at our families, and no matter where you are financially, are you a giver? Because, Sandra, I'm the firm believer that when you give, it comes back to you tenfold. So no matter where you're at, you can find, and if it's not your treasure, it's your time, right?
Yeah. We all have a role to play.
It's so true. Well, thank you, Sandra. We will have you back and keep an eye on this. Hopefully, a year or so from now, we won't be heading towards that cliff, and we'll be able to have you back, and you'll tell us what great things Congress did. I know that's a strange statement for me to make, but I have hope. Thank you, Sandra, so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. And
Thank
to
you.
my audience, guys, we'll see you soon.